time it is. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
And we are live. Greetings to our loyal WFYL listeners around the world. Welcome back to your Philadelphia live stream, only on the Freedom Station. I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in once again, because you still have the right to hear and the right to be heard. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mike G. As always, with me are Russ the producer and Liberty Lee. And you're listening to Mike G in the morning with The Law Matters. And you can listen to our program every Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern, only on the Freedom Station, WFYL. So let's be heard. I want to remind our listeners that you can participate in the free and open exchange of thoughts and ideas throughout the entire week by visiting MikeGinTheMorning.com. What's it called, Russ?
MikeGinTheMorning.com.
There he is. He's not sleeping. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your barber, tell your Uncle Jerry, tell anybody who'll listen to check us out at MikeGinTheMorning.com. I also want to remind our listeners about the powerhouse lineup we've got here at the Freedom Station. Kick off your mornings with Scott Adams. Bring you the Scott Adams Show weekdays from 9 a.m. until 11. We've got Dan the Man Bongino bringing you the Dan Bongino Show weekdays from noon until 3 p.m. We've got the headliner, intellectual giant Ben Shapiro, bringing you the Ben Shapiro Show weekdays from 3 to 5 p.m. And finally, we love having him at the Freedom Station family. We've got Michael Knowles, bringing you the Michael Knowles Show weekdays from 5 to 6 p.m. So don't forget to tune in and show him some love. And with that, you know what time it is. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. Hit it, Russ.
You know what time it is. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Now, we have a very special guest who will be joining us in this program today, Todd La Neve, West Virginia gun lawyer. And he's got quite the impressive resume. We've got a lot to talk about with him. But I will tell you, there's been something weighing on my mind as of late. I did a television appearance yesterday to discuss a new Illinois law. And from what I gather, this Illinois law will outlaw advertising for firearms that officials determine produce a public safety threat or appeal to children, militants, or others who might later use the weapons illegally. That's right. If you're confused, then you're listening. These are advertising for firearms that officials determine, right, in their infinite wisdom, produce a public safety threat or appeal to children, militants, or others who might later use the weapons illegally. Well, I always knew that the government was almighty. I didn't realize they had this kind of a crystal ball. This is wrong on so many levels, folks. The fact that they talk about firearms appealing to children, I think that is nothing more than a distraction here, because that's what all the headlines will say. It'll talk about how people are trying to sell guns to kids. They're pushing this on our kids. They're ruining the future generation, leaving out the fact that the power is entirely in the hands of the government to determine what types of advertisements will appeal to militants or others who might later use the weapons illegally. Because we all know how many gangbangers are out there looking for the ads, right? They're buying handgun magazines saying, okay, which one of these appeal to me so I could go through the process and buy it from a federal firearms licensee, fill out the paperwork, and submit to a background check. That's how they do it, right? Give me a break. This is nothing more than a power grab. Do not be fooled. Never mind the fact that there is nothing wrong with children learning about firearms safety. And the type of things you'll see in these media headlines is how they've got these super scary rifles that are being marketed towards children, specifically for children. Right? These modern sporting rifles that have all additional safety features, these are 22s. When it comes down to it, we're talking about 22s, and there is nothing wrong with children learning about firearms safety. Maybe that's what's wrong with this country, is that children don't have exposure to firearms at an early age in the right context. Years ago, they used to teach firearm safety in schools. Children used to learn at a young age. During hunting season, every single truck in that high school parking lot would have a rifle. Children would bring guns to school to be locked up in a separate room so they could go hunting. And guess what? Nobody shot up the school. Why is that? Because these anti-gunners are not willing to admit that access to firearms is not the problem. Because if it were, we'd have known about it a long time ago. The fact of the matter is, it has never been more difficult in this country to access a firearm. It's not like they loosened up the laws and that's when we saw all these problems happen. No. The access laws became more and more and more stringent. And guess what? Didn't solve the problem. It didn't cure murder, believe it or not. Look at places like Baltimore, Maryland. They can't even keep it to one homicide a day. Places like Newark, New Jersey. And we can all agree with the fact that there are no gun laws that are more oppressive than places like Baltimore, Maryland, and Newark, New Jersey. You can't legislate this away. It's going to take some real work from these people and change our attitude, change our culture. Focus on core values, the family unit, the value for human life that has been lost in this country. But it's far too simple for these politicians to just try to throw another law at it. Make them feel good, right? Look at me, I did something. You did nothing. You're nothing but a bum. Never mind the fact that you got places in this country where children are exposed to firearms for a very young age. They learn the rules of firearm safety and they're better off because of it. There is nothing wrong with children learning about the rules of firearm safety at an early age under adult supervision. And that's all that we're talking about here. But you can't have reasonable conversations with these people. Number one, you'll be having two different conversations. You don't have the same set of facts that you're talking about back and forth. They have their own facts, their imaginary facts. These super scary looking rifles. Let's not mention the fact that we're talking about a 22. Let's not mention the fact that these firearms have added safety features to be used under adult supervision to teach children these fundamentals of firearm safety at a young age. And these are the same people. And you better listen up. These are the same people who think that these young children can make life-altering decisions about their gender and have a surgery and put chemicals in their body that are irreversible, and that they should be allowed to do that without their parents' consent. These are the same people who want the government to be able to control how firearms are advertised to children. If you think about it, when you look at the firearms exposure and the approach that they take, just hide it. Pretend they don't exist. Maybe they'll never find out. It's the exact opposite that these very same people take when it comes to sex education. They say, well, you're never going to prevent it. The whole abstinence thing, that's never going to happen. So let's just teach them the rules of safety. How dare you? These hypocrites. You cannot have a reasonable conversation with these people. For those of us just tuning in, you're listening to Mike G in the Morning with The Law Matters, only on the Freedom Station, WFYL. We've got a very special guest joining us today. We've got the West Virginia gun lawyer himself. Todd La Neve has been practicing law for over 3 decades, and he's done everything from minor crimes to homicide cases. He's a Second Amendment advocate. He's a self-defense attorney. He's a friend of mine. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Todd La Neve. Todd, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Mike. It's great to be on with you tonight.
I'm incredibly grateful that I didn't scare you away with my opening monologue.
I agreed with every single thing you said.
That's great to hear. Let me ask you this.
Absolutely.
Were you raised in West Virginia?
No, no. So my dad had a military career. He was in for 26 years, and we moved around a little bit. Not as much as I know a lot of families did, but we actually spent his last 10 years in the service in Westchester, just right next door to you guys.
Ah,
So left there after my eighth grade year, and we moved down here to West Virginia at that point. So I've been here since 1981, 82, long enough that I'm considered naturalized now.
there you
I
go.
never be a native, never be a native, but I'm naturalized. So,
That works. That's good enough.
yeah.
Now, being around a father, and we thank him for his service, but being around a father who was in the service and being in a place like Pennsylvania that's firearms friendly, and then later West Virginia, were
Mm.
you exposed to firearms at a young age?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we had guns in the house, and my dad wasn't a huge hunter, but he taught us about gun safety when we were young. I've got two older brothers, actually still live right there in the area, and we were all three taught that, and then got involved in Boy Scouts, and of course had great opportunities in Scouts to learn how to shoot, learn more about gun safety. That's at what you started 11, 12,
Mm,
and your actual Boy Scouts started in Cub Scouts and didn't have as many shooting opportunities then. But, literally by the time I was 11 or 12, I knew more about gun safety than probably 99% of our Congress does. So, um,
that's
yeah,
great. Now,
yeah.
is that the perspective? That's obviously the only perspective that you know is being raised around firearms. Do you find that that was in any way detrimental to your youth or your upbringing, or that you were somehow had these urges to go out there and commit crimes with a firearm?
Right. I feel pretty normal. I even got spanked while I was at it, so, and I still, I haven't killed anybody yet. Yeah.
Now, when you see this anti-gun movement when it comes to our youth and trying to hide them from any exposure whatsoever, do you think that that creates a problem when people ultimately run into firearms and they have no idea about the rules of safety?
Absolutely. I mean, it's this whole anti-gun movement thing is absolutely ludicrous. And not going to sidetrack too far here, but what I see going on in the United States today
Mm,
at 56 years old, Mike, I look back and I think this isn't the same country I grew up in. We are in a place and a time that literally I never could have imagined. It's like bizarro world what we're turning into, and the stuff that you hear coming out of the talking heads day in and day out on these issues. They, stand behind a podium and get mics shoved in their face, and the absolutely ludicrous statements that come out of their mouths, especially when it comes to firearms. I mean, it's so insane that I almost can't laugh at it. What's that? There's that one idiot, I think from California several years ago that was holding up an AR style rifle, talking about the 30 caliber magazine clip
that's
that
right.
shoots, 1,000 rounds in under 20 seconds. I mean, what a moron!
Half
What a
a second.
moron!
De
It's
Leon, I think his name was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's him. But yeah, so this effort to oh, we got to shield everybody. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely dangerous because then you get these kids who have never been exposed. As you said, they get around a firearm, they have no clue what to do other than, hey, grand theft auto, this is how you,
Mm,
shoot this, and, let's kill as many people as we can. You want to talk about something that's desensitized our youth. It's these video games. It's the absence of the core family unit. It's so many things that have absolutely nothing to do with the gun itself. And yeah, it's funny. Just this past weekend, I had the opportunity to work with two new shooters and teach them some basics of firearm safety and handling. And they had no idea, but they're adults, and so it was a little easier to reason with them. But the lack of information that's out there for a lot of people is just astounding to me. And we sit here and we talk about, oh, it's the gun, it's the gun, it's the gun. I was able to share with these folks the gun is nothing more than a tool that will do exactly what you tell it to do and nothing more. The
right.
problem is up here with the people that are carrying them. And you talked about the gangbangers and the others. I mean, that's absolutely the issue. It's this huge ego thing, and people don't want to be bested by somebody else. They want to have something that's better and cooler. And again, they have no concept, one, of how to use it properly, and two, no concept of the value of life. It's sickening.
Now, being
Sorry, did
in
my
West
own little
Virginia,
monologue there. So
that was great. That was fantastic. Being out in West Virginia, that seems like a place where it might be just a little bit different than much of the much of the rest of the country. And what I mean by that is you might see Democrats that come out of West Virginia that are not akin to your Democrats in New York or New Jersey, for example, or California, like you say. So
now,
how would you describe the culture in West Virginia?
so it's interesting. Obviously we are an Appalachian state, and there's a lot of deep history in Appalachia that's rooted back to Europe, and a lot of people who emigrated here legally, by the way, and built families, built lives, built industry. Very hardworking blue collar state, was really established on the strength of the coal industry, and that's something along with firearms that we've seen under attack here most of my adult life. Of course, it's not consistent with the Green New Deal. We all need to have an electric car, of course, which is being charged on electric coming out of power plants that are fired by coal and gas, which is a convenient little fact that these idiots never bother to share. And of course, you've got all the virtue signaling morons driving their Prius and whatnot. Oh, I'm doing better for the environment. Yeah, great. Yeah, good for you. But West Virginia is, like you said, it's a very blue collar state. We've got a mentality here of working hard, providing for our families, being honest, putting in a hard day's work for the things that we have. And I got to tell you, having spent the vast majority of my life here, I absolutely love this state, and I love the fact that a lot of people look at us as a bunch of backwards hicks, because that means they're not going to come here.
Right.
And that's great with me. Don't bring your politics to our state. We're a solid red state right now for the first time in a long time. And as a lifelong conservative, it's great to see the changes happening here. But it's funny, Mike, when I was growing up, the Democrats in this state were not like the Democrats that you see today. You didn't see a single one running around with a hope and change sticker on the back of their bumpers. These were guys who worked for unions their whole lives. They worked in high intensity labor jobs. They were proud of the work they did. They were proud of this country. They loved America, and that was their first and foremost loyalty. Maybe right behind their loyalty to this state. But the party certainly has been hijacked nationally. And by the way, I'm not going to sit here and say that the Republicans are what they once were either.
Right.
We've got plenty of these guys that they're clearly the rhinos who are selling out the conservative core values of what I think really still is a majority of Americans every single day that they're in Washington. But the Democrat Party is definitely very different. We still have a lot of Democrats here that have not totally bought in on the progressive line that the National Democrat Party is selling these days. But we have our fair share. We've got pockets in some of the larger cities here in the state that there's definitely a far more leftist mindset, definitely a far more liberal, progressive idealism that exists, and it's a shame. But fortunately, they are in a very small minority right now. Our state legislature has I think, an ultra super majority of Republican versus Democrat, and I think it's a sign of what people are seeing here from our state is an attack on our way of life, an attack on the values that make us who we are, an attack on our industries, and it's definitely changed the culture for the first time in, I want to say, 8 or 9 decades. We now have more Republican registered voters than we do Democrat. And it was a really big deal to see that change happen. So,
And it doesn't sound like the people's values have changed. Their party has changed.
yeah,
And because the party on the left has gone in a different direction, the people have had to choose to change their affiliation. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, West Virginians for the most part are still West Virginians, and these are people who give you the shirt off their back. Again, there's a lot of bad rap about, oh, don't go up in the hollers, don't go into some of these little towns. You know what? The people that are out there, by and large, are phenomenal people who literally would do anything for a stranger. Just treat them with some respect. Don't
Why would
act
people
like
say not to go there? As somebody who's not from around there, that
there,
doesn't.
there are a lot of stereotypes. It's inbred hillbillies, and
Ah,
we have a major drug problem in this state. It's just been tragic to see. A lot of it is a reflection of the loss of industry, particularly the energy industry.
mm,
A lot of people just have been laid off. They've lost jobs. They have nowhere to go. Young people don't have a lot of opportunities, it seems, in parts of the state anyway. And we've just got this unbelievable flow of drugs coming into our state from places like Detroit and down south Florida, and it's something that probably touches, I'd say, 60-70% of my practice.
wow.
Just this drug epidemic, and there's a huge effort on to go after it, but it's you know look at our southern border and look at what's happening there with these drugs coming in. It just seems like it's an endless supply for the people that want to bring them here. And unfortunately, there's an all too willing market, and so that shapes, I think, a lot of the impression that people have. Um, Got to watch out. Places are dangerous, and like anywhere, you do have pockets of places where you just need to be smart, but again, for the most part, the people here are good, salt of the earth folks who, again, would give you the shirt off their back. If you're broken down on the highway, it's funny how many times somebody will stop and say, "Hey, you need a hand?" People will help you change a
Wow.
tire. They'll, make a phone call. They'll give you a ride. It's an incredible state. It's just an incredible state. And again, I'm kind of glad that we don't have people flooding here because I think
Sure.
they would do nothing but change the culture. So
When I went to law school in Tulsa, I befriended a few gentlemen from the cigar shop, and we were talking about how great Tulsa is, and I had no idea that this place existed before I came to school over here, and they were like, "Don't tell anybody. We don't want anybody moving in and ruining this place.
yeah,
Keep it a secret, please."
yeah.
Speaking of law school, what made you decide to go down the road of being an attorney?
Well, this is kind of embarrassing at this point in my career, but
Hmm.
WVU has a pretty good reputation as a party school, and I enjoyed my first 4 years there. And honestly, my initial thought was, "Hey, 3 more years, and I don't have to get a job, and I have a chance to
Wow.
hang out in Morgantown and just have some more fun." So I had no high and noble calling to go to law school and try to change the world, but I've always enjoyed talking. I've always enjoyed debating issues. Just ask my parents, and still happens. And it's it's something that was a good fit. And honestly, I kind of felt like once I got into it, that this is a great opportunity to open up a lot of different doors potentially. And had the appreciation back then that having a law degree really created a ton of opportunity that just about anything you wanted to pursue, you could pursue. So,
That's true. So when you got into law school, did you have some kind of gravitation towards criminal law? Did you work at a firm during your education that drove you in that direction?
yeah, well, actually, I had kind of a revulsion of criminal law. It's funny,
Really?
my buddies that I hung out with, we would all talk about, like, yeah, man, who would ever want to be a criminal lawyer? Why would you do
Mm,
that kind of work? We all felt that being a civil attorney, pursuing some kind of civil law career was the way to go. And in fact, I started out doing insurance defense work, and some might say that's where I got my first exposure to real crime. But so,
I I was going to
did
make a joke and said, then you decided you didn't want to go to hell. So,
well, a buddy of mine has a sign up in his office that said, "Being a lawyer is easy. It's like riding a bike, except that the bike is on fire you're on fire, everything is on fire, and you're riding through hell.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, didn't want to go to hell, so yeah,
Eh,
chose a different profession. Now I started off doing insurance work, and just kind of an interesting progression. I ended up leaving the insurance company that I was working for at one point. I was general counsel for a regional insurance carrier,
Oh, wow.
and they decided to close their book of business here in West Virginia. And
Mm.
this was just shortly after I'd gotten married and bought a house. It's like, oh, great, you're closing the branch down, and kept them as a client for a little while. And then when the business all wrapped up, I was in kind of a tough position as a solo practitioner. I'm not going to get another insurance company to sign me on as panel counsel. And so I thought, man, I better figure something out quick, and started putting my name on all the court appointment lists in my
Wow.
home county and counties around me, and learned the tough way. About 8 years in, and started started taking these cases and spending a lot of time again researching and just learning what the law was and reading cases, and started getting some decent results, started winning some cases, and started getting my court appointed clients referring me to their derelict friends who had money, and started taking private pay cases. Was amazed the first time I think I got a $1,500 fee. And
Wow.
it was like, wow, look at this. This would be 6 months work doing court appointed
Right.
cases. But
Yeah, I don't think people realize how little you get paid for court-appointed cases. And
yeah,
talk about your happy clients. I feel like that is sometimes a tough crowd when you're doing court-appointed work, because you got some
absolutely.
guy who walks in and he's got a terrible case and he wants you to work miracles for
Yeah,
him.
yeah. You've been there. You've been there. You know what it's like, I'm sure. Yeah, it's tough, and sometimes they're the most demanding. But when they're not paying a cent, sometimes they have the strongest opinions. It seems so.
Sure.
Uh, but yeah, just I've always believed in maybe trying to differentiate myself a little bit by working hard and being available.
Hmm.
And it's funny. I took it was a medical law seminar in law school, and it was a dealing with medical law issues and all that stuff. Not something I ever wanted to get into, but third year needed an elective, and it seemed like a decent class to take. And one of the things that sticks with me, and probably the only thing that sticks with me from that class 30 some years later, was a segment in our text that talked about the fact that most medical malpractice claims are the result of patients feeling that their doctor didn't spend enough time with them.
Really?
And there was an inverse, ratio of the amount of time spent to the number of lawsuits filed. And some, study that had been done that was, discussed in the text. And that always stuck with me, thinking, well, geez, it's not probably just doctors. It's probably any service profession
Sure.
where you're dealing with a client where they're not getting a tangible product, they're getting
Mm,
your time.
mm.
And early on, I just kind of purposed in my mind that if I'm going to do this right, if I'm going to serve people well, I'm going to be available for them, and I'm going to take time, and I'm going to explain, and I'm going to answer all the questions that sometimes I pull my hair out, which is why I have none left. But you know, I just it's like, man, why are they asking these basic, simple questions? And fortunately, I've got a wonderful wife who keeps me grounded, and she just says, "Hey, Todd, remember, this is the first time they've ever been through this."
Right.
And it's like, oh man, why do you have to always be right? But she is, and so I uh, I try to take the time and recognize that, while for me, I may have 50, 60 clients at any given time, I try to keep a fairly low caseload so that I can serve them. You know, for them, it's the only case that they have.
Sure.
And having that appreciation and respect for somebody who's placed their trust in me to be their legal advocate, you stop and think about it and realize that's a really weighty trust that they've placed with you. And so I try to take my time. I try to be patient. I try to answer questions. I try to be very good at communicating, taking calls that have nothing to do with the case. Hey, I'm applying for a job and the application says this, and how should I answer? I'm not an employment lawyer, but let's sit and let's take a look at it.
Right.
And I think that doing those kinds of things really make a difference in having happy clients that are going to be willing to tell other people, you know what, Todd treated me well. He took time. He answered questions for me. I always knew what was going on, and that's kind of I think one of the things that I've always tried to carry out of that one stupid healthcare law class, that I took way back when, and seems to serve me well. And it's funny. I've had some buddies that are lawyers that'll be like, "I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you answer these questions. How you take this time."
Hmm.
It's to me, I don't know any other way. So
I agree. I agree because it's difficult when people don't see all the work you are doing behind the scenes, right?
yeah,
They're
yeah,
not sitting there
absolutely.
with you when you're spending an hour or 2 hours reviewing the case file or prepping for a hearing and
Yep.
things of that nature. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so they, for all they know, you're doing nothing and you've been pushed to
Right.
the bottom of the pile.
Yep.
And the communication aspect, it's really comes down to customer service. So much
Yeah.
of being a good attorney comes down to customer service.
Yeah.
Uh, they talk about doctors that have bad bedside manner. You know what I mean? Right.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of attorneys who unfortunately are the same way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It is
they don't
unfortunate.
realize, as you were saying, this might be my 10,000th time doing this particular kind of case, but it's their first time. So they're not going to
Right.
know this basic stuff. Now, with that being
No.
said, there are a lot of misconceptions that I find among criminal defense clients. And maybe you could talk about some of the misconceptions that you see among criminal defense clients. Just a basic one that always sticks out in my mind is when you have somebody who makes an accusation against them and there's no corroborating evidence. For example, there's no video footage, there's no photographs, and maybe there are not even any other witnesses. And they say, well, they can't bring this case as he said, she said. Well, that's not
Yep.
how it works. Their testimony of their observations is, in fact, evidence.
Yep.
And the example I always use with them is I say, suppose your grandma's walking down a dark alley. Some violent criminal beats her over the back of the head, rapes her viciously, leaves her there in the alley. There's no cameras, right? There's no other witnesses. But grandma's able to go to the police and say, hey, this is the guy who did it. And she points him out in a lineup. Can they bring that case to trial? And they say, oh, no, they can't charge that guy. I'm like, are you crazy?
Yeah.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
Grandma's out of luck. Is that what he said?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it would be like if he said, she said, just simply meant that they couldn't bring a case. Do you get clients who have that misunderstanding as well?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. People come in and, well, it's one of those, red flag issues for me. Yeah. There shouldn't be any reason we can't beat this case. I'm like,
Mm.
yeah, okay. I am not shy about sharing with people that their Google search does not equate to my law degree and 30 years of experience doing this work. And sometimes I don't get hired, but
Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay. But
Well,
yeah,
hold on.
you
That
sure.
is important. I have a buddy who often tells people he didn't go to the YouTube School of Law.
Well, these days, I think Facebook School of Law may be
Facebook
just
School of Law.
edging it out. So,
You'll pull your hair out of your head. But if
yeah,
you're
yeah,
dealing with somebody who's got unreasonable expectations, then that is probably not going to end well. Sure, you might hit a
yeah,
grand slam, knock it out of the park, and get them their unreasonable expectation because you were able to pull off a miracle.
yeah,
But unless you pull off that miracle, even if you have a really great result given the circumstances, and they're not going to be happy, then nobody's better off. And what happens sometimes with these people is they'll call around to enough attorneys, and one guy will blow smoke and tell them what they want to hear, right? They'll overpromise. And then when the case turns out the way Todd said it was going to in the first place, and the
yeah.
person's doubly disappointed. But
Yeah,
anyhow,
yeah, yeah. Over promising and under delivering is unfortunately something that I think happens a lot. It's funny. I've always tried to just make the point to folks: look, I can't give you any assurance of what your outcome is going to be because I'm not the guy making the decision. Not my
hmm
role. My job
hmm
is to influence the decision makers, the officer, the prosecutor, magistrate, the judge, the jury, whoever it may be, but I don't get to make that decision for you. And there's a lot of clients that, if I was able to make the decision, hey, dismissed, go ahead, leave me your fee, and you're done. You're finished up. Others, not so. But it's I think managing expectations is one of the most important things that we need to do. And be realistic with people. Try to be
Right.
honest. Just shoot straight with them, and you don't have to hit them over the head with it by being straight, but be straight with them and just let them know. Look, here are the problems that I see in your case, and you've come to me based on a reputation, based on a recommendation, maybe based on reading a review online, something. And I've gotten to where I've gotten. I've had the success I've had because I try to be honest with everybody involved in the process. I try to be very candid with them and make sure that, if we have a weakness, well, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about how that may affect you. And, we may need to concede some of these points when we're dealing with the prosecutors. And, in doing that, gain some credibility, gain some ground with negotiations. But yeah, you got to be realistic, and some people just don't want to hear that, and that's a tough case when that's what you're facing.
Well, when our goal is to put them in the best position possible, simply telling them what they want to hear, even if it's not true, is not putting them in the best position possible. And
Absolutely,
we're doing them a disservice by doing that. Did you ever have the occasion to meet attorney Brian Cisco out of Pittsburgh with the U.S.
Uh,
Law Shield?
I've actually talked with Brian a number of times. We've
Okay.
shared some information back and forth, but yeah, we've never actually had a chance to sit down face to face.
Interesting character, right? Very
Yeah,
unique character.
yeah.
I've had the pleasure of working with him almost my entire career. But
Okay.
one thing that I heard him say to a client years ago, when they had unreasonable expectations, he said, "Let me explain something to you. You know how when your wife's pregnant and she's overweight and she comes out and asks, 'Does this dress make me look fat?' Conventional wisdom says that you say, 'No, honey, you look absolutely beautiful. You don't look fat at all.' You know how that's conventional?" They say, "Yeah, of course." And he says, "Well, in this situation, you don't want me to say that. You want me to say, 'No, you look terrible. You look huge, terribly fat. Go change right away. This is a horrible idea. You shouldn't go out in public.' That's how you want me to talk to you under these circumstances." I thought that put it pretty well.
That's excellent. I love it.
Might not be the way that I would have gone with it out of the gate, but that fits his personality. And it goes along with what you're talking about, how, you manage the expectations, telling them what they need to hear and what
Yeah.
not what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Did you have some
they-
pretty high level cases out of the gate? Like, when was your when you start trying homicide cases and things of that nature?
Well, so I don't do a lot of them, but
Mhm.
first one I did was probably 15, 18 years ago, and got appointed with another attorney who had been appointed since they required two in capital cases here in West Virginia. So got a chance to get into that, and tell you, it's very, very different work. A whole different set of standards, evidentiary concerns, things that you know are present at some level in most criminal cases, but obviously capital cases are a very different animal, and it's something
Sure.
that I really don't do a whole lot of at this point. I'm able to, but just have not had those kind of cases come along. So
Well, I don't think people realize how few people have the funds to hire a private attorney under those
absolutely,
circumstances, right?
yeah, yeah,
Most people are involved in a homicide don't have 200 plus grand to be throwing at the case. They
yeah,
just
absolutely.
don't.
Yeah.
So unless what are some of the famous high profile rich people who were accused of homicide? I can't think
Who's
of
the
any
guy
off
down
the
in
top of
South
my head.
Carolina? Just
So,
last year?
right.
Forget the name, but yeah, I think he had it.
It's people like that. But other than that, and that's why Law Shield comes in clutch for a lot of these people, because it's sort of like
Yeah,
a court appointed type deal, because they only had to pay their membership fee and they didn't have to shell out, 200 plus grand for this kind of
right,
representation.
right.
So,
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people, I think you're right, don't have an appreciation of what it costs, and yeah, if you want to have it done right, now you better be ready to sell the house and close the retirement accounts and the college funds and everything to take care of it, because it's literally it's the kind of thing, as you know, I'm sure, you take on a murder case, a homicide case, it's that's to the exclusion of everything else
right.
for probably 6 to 12 months, and yeah, they definitely cost a lot just because of that and the involvement, the amount of time, the hearings, the research, the motions, the arguments, the negotiating. It's a huge undertaking.
If you're going to do it right, and you don't want
Yeah.
somebody to not do it right.
Yeah.
It's how people make
Yeah.
big mistakes. So, what kinds of cases do you really enjoy doing in terms of criminal defense? Is there any type of case that really you get up in the morning, can't wait to go after that kind of a case?
No.
No.
Not at this stage of my career. No,
Ah,
yeah, it's funny. I love what I do. I love being able to help people. It really doesn't matter to me. There's
gotcha.
no one thing in particular. I like the vast majority of my clients, and I've always found that if I can find a personal connection with them, man, it's just so much easier to advocate for them passionately. And I'm fortunate. I've had a good run of luck with clients that, for the most part, I enjoy. They're good people who got into a bad scenario, made a bad choice. This isn't a lifestyle for most of my clients,
Mm.
and that's a much easier person to represent and to be passionate about and to advocate for when when we have our day in court. And so, for me, honestly, Mike, it's probably more about the people than it is the kind of case. What's my opportunity to put this man, this woman back with their family? See to it that the family doesn't get separated because of a bad outcome. That's what does get me fired up. And again, more so not the issue, but the person. And, on the occasion that you have a client that you don't have that connection with, as you know, show me any case file and I'll probably be able to show you some kind of constitutional violation that happened somewhere. And it just so happens that I am deeply passionate about the Constitution of the United States of America. And if I can get behind that, maybe I don't have that same kind of excitement for my client, but I do for the Constitution, and I love to go fight for that. And I tell people, look, if I let them cut a corner here or there, it's not just cutting the corner on you. That's cutting a corner on me. It's cutting a corner on my family, my friends. I'm not going to let that happen. Not on my watch. So
That's the truth, because people don't understand that if you just jump to conclusions and take away due process for people who are quote unquote guilty,
yeah,
then sooner or later they're going to be jumping to those conclusions on you because they believe that you're guilty, right? That's the very
yeah,
basis of the whole
absolutely.
the
Well,
whole process. I don't think
goes
people
back to
understand that.
the Illinois law that you were talking about in the opening.
Right.
Things that could lead. It's like that Tom Cruise movie, The Minority Report.
Exactly.
Oh well, we are certain you're going to commit a crime, and therefore the ad that you just promoted here to that person who's going to use this firearm illicitly makes you liable. Wait, what?
It's totally crazy. I do have a question along those lines, though. When you start to get into your constitutional rights and the understanding of the criminal justice system, search and seizure, or not consenting to searches, not making any statements, demanding counsel when you're questioned, it seems to me that for the most part, gun owners have a healthy respect for law enforcement officers,
Mhm.
sometimes to their detriment, in that they don't realize how important it is to insert your rights. Meaning,
Absolutely.
they have this instinct to cooperate no matter what's being asked of them, even if
Mhm.
it's waiving their right to silence an attorney or waiving their right against unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant. And once they consent, all that goes out the window. All your protections go out the window. Do you find that there's this disconnect there with people who are generally law abiding gun owners as far as what their rights are?
By and large, my clients probably could be summarized by comedian Ron White. I had the right to remain silent, but I lacked the ability. It's a shame, and you've mentioned Law Shield a couple of times. I know you do work for Law Shield in PA, as I do here in West Virginia. And one of the great things about that is getting the chance to go around the state and lecture and share with people use of force laws and considerations there. And we talk a lot about the Fifth Amendment. And it's funny. I've got I I always make sure people understand when I'm discussing that it's not an anti-cop rant
Right.
in any sense whatsoever. I've got a lot of great friends who are cops, guys that I hang out with, guys that I train with, guys that I trust. Every single one of those guys say, I agree 100%. People shouldn't be talking to me. And in fact, I've got one buddy, I won't say who he is or where he works, but he will often, after he's given somebody Miranda warning, when they inevitably begin chirping away, he'll kind of lean back so his body cam isn't picking it up and go, don't talk. He
Yeah.
doesn't, he's trying to say, hey, I told you, you
Give
have the
him a
right
hint.
to remain silent. It's an invitation to shut up.
Right.
Shut up, accept the invitation. And you're right. I think by and large, gun owners, for the most part, are good, solid, law-abiding people who do believe in the rule of law, who do believe that law enforcement is not the enemy. And I agree with that for the most part. But in that moment, when you are the subject of a criminal investigation, guess what? This guy that maybe you hang out with, who lives next door, who you went to high school with, he's not your buddy in that moment. In that moment, he's a professional doing a job, investigating the facts of a potential crime, tying them up in a neat little bow, hanging it on your neck, and shuffling you off to the prosecuting attorney so that he can go home safe. And, doing their job for him isn't how you're going to get it done. I love to ask people, are you married? Do you have a significant relationship with somebody? And we're like, well, yeah. And so obviously you've perfected communications, right? You and your spouse never have a disagreement. And they'll all start laughing like, well, that's not true. I said, yeah, exactly. In my case, my wife is the one person in this world who I trust 100% without any question. No matter what I've done, right or wrong, she will have my back. Now, if I was wrong, especially, I'll hear about it for like the next 26 years of our marriage. But she will have my back in that moment. I have that kind of level of trust with her, but I can't get my communications perfect with her. And so if she and I, with 26 years together, can't be perfect in our communications, what makes you think you're going to be perfect with an officer with whom you have no connection in an incredibly high stress situation, standing over a dead or dying body? You think they're hearing what you're saying? Do you think that the communication is working, that they're hearing what it was you intended to convey to them? Absolutely not going to happen. And I don't care how astute you are, what you do for a living. If you're not doing what you and I do every day, dealing with police and prosecutors and courts, you're going to talk yourself into an arrest and very possibly into a conviction based on what you said. And so, yeah, I'd love to stress to people the critical, sense of, don't talk to them. It's not disrespectful. It's simply asserting your right to remain silent. Now, officer, I refuse to answer any questions without my attorney present. I don't have anything else to say. And if they read you your Miranda warning, then great. That's covered too. But don't talk to them. But it's hard. People, like you said, I think, want to feel like, hey, I'm a good guy. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just telling them the truth.
Right.
But the truth by what standard? What sort of confirmation bias is going on? What sort of, subtle cues are being missed in the tension of this horrible situation? Yeah,
Totally.
you're talking yourself right into a charge, and again, potentially into a conviction. There may not be anything I can do to get you out of what you said. So,
the back of my shirt says "lawyer up and shut up." That's what the back of this shirt says.
I will tell you that's something that I've actually been using for several years in my talks.
Perfect.
And I haven't given you attribution on that, but you'll have to talk to our mutual friend Mike Moore, because he was the one that said, "Hey, you ought to include this because this is really good."
Perfect. Perfect. The more people who hear it, the better, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
It makes our job easier at the end of the day. It's interesting. You were talking about the Miranda warnings, and we've all heard them from the time that we're very, very young. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you, right? They don't say we might use it against you. We might use it to help you out.
Right.
And for whatever reason, you have otherwise intelligent people who sit across from a law enforcement officer who is telling you to your face, I want you to say something that I could use against you in court to put you in jail for a very, very long time. Would you mind helping me out? And their response is, sure, let's give it a shot, right?
Let's go. Jump into it.
And I've had law enforcement officers, like you mentioned. I had one show up to one of my seminars. He pulled me over to the side during the break. He said, I've been an active law enforcement officer for 30 years. And I got to tell you, the best thing you told those people was lawyer up and shut up. And that's what I've been telling my children from the time they were old enough to understand what it means. And you were talking even about people who do what we do every day for a living, talking to law enforcement officers and prosecutors. But I'll take it a step even further than that, because even if I were personally involved in any kind of a critical incident, even though this is what I do every day, I would still lawyer up and shut up. I would still assert those rights.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, when you're involved in a critical incident, your body undergoes these physiological effects, which impact the way you're going to be able to communicate, right? One of the things that happens after a critical incident, you get hit with that chemical dump that everybody talks about. That adrenaline hits you like a ton of bricks. One of the things that happens is you're not able to recall details about what just happened, because 70% of the blood rushes from your frontal cortex. So keeping that in mind, people who are in car accidents experience this to a smaller extent, and they recall details 2 or 3 days later that they didn't remember the second they got out of the car, and they were freaking out. But in these think about, like you were talking about, it's the most stressful situation you've ever been through in your entire life, a life or death situation. It's probably 2 o'clock in the morning too, right? Where you haven't slept, you haven't eaten anything, and now you got to answer questions 40 minutes in a row. No thanks. That's not going to work.
No, you're absolutely right. It's just not the time to talk. I understand that in Pennsylvania, the state police have a policy: if an officer is involved in a shooting, they can't be questioned for a period of 72 hours. Why is that? Well, exactly what you just said. The adrenaline dump, the haziness of everything in the immediate aftermath. So, if a break is good enough for law enforcement, well, it ought to be good enough for average citizens as well. And you're right. I mean, we just shouldn't be talking, and I think that's probably one of the most important things as attorneys that we need to drill into the public anytime we have an opportunity to share with people. Look, it's not about being anti-police; it's about protecting your rights and recognizing that under the stress of a high intensity encounter of some sort, especially where you've shot somebody, that's not the time to be sitting trying to account for fine details of everything that took place.
The law enforcement officers who I know in my personal life, as they see it, swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and see no problem with somebody asserting their rights that are protected under that same Constitution.
Yep.
It's not like the founding fathers stood in a circle somewhere and they're like, all right, what can we put in this Constitution thing that'll let all the guilty guys go free, right? We want to figure out how to let all the bad guys out onto the streets. And for whatever reason, there's this narrative that asserting your rights means that you're guilty, right? Exercising the constitutional rights are only for those who are guilty. They're only for people who have something to hide, but they're not. They're for law-abiding citizens just as much as they are for anybody else, and they need to use them.
It's a subtle concept that seems to be lost in the internet school of law.
That's the truth. That's the truth. And it's interesting to hear some of the natural responses from some of these people when you're doing seminars. If you just kind of throw it at them, okay, let's put yourself in this scenario. You got a dead body on the kitchen floor, and the police show up. They ask you what happened. What do you say? And they start to stammer and try to talk their way out of it. And they haven't actually been through the scenario at all in that situation, right? They're just sitting in front of a classroom full of people.
Right.
And if you had said that evening, you would be going to jail for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So it's a hard lesson. A lot of people don't learn until it's too late, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. I've had plenty of clients do exactly that, and it has been tough getting them through their cases.
So I want to talk a little bit about West Virginia gun laws. How would you describe, if you could, West Virginia gun laws? Would you describe them as gun friendly? Would you describe them as surprisingly not friendly or tricky? How would you describe West Virginia gun laws?
Very friendly, very friendly. This is a state that really has at the core of its history firearms as part of family life. We've been supportive of the Second Amendment forever. In fact, our state constitution specifically says, we have the right to maintain firearms for, among other things, the right of self-defense. And not certainly it's not in the Second Amendment of the Constitution, but that's clearly how it has been interpreted, in a multitude of cases. But West Virginia took the step of making that an express inclusion in our state constitution. But yeah, very, very gun friendly state. In fact, we've got a wonderful grassroots organization here, the West Virginia Citizens Defense League, that is incredibly active in lobbying, in advancing legislation, and working hard in our state legislature when it's in session the beginning of every year to try to improve the gun law culture here. One of the best things that we've done in my time as an attorney, I'm a member, but I'm not active in the day-to-day lobbying. A good friend of mine, Ian Masters, is the president of the organization and does a fantastic job, along with an excellent board of directors, really identifying areas that we want to go after. And they've really put in a yeoman's effort making a positive impact in gun law. But several years ago, we passed the federal non-participation bill, which essentially says that after the passage of that law, no new federal gun law may be enforced by a state actor. So
Wow.
municipal police, county deputies, the state police, natural resources police, any state law enforcement actor may not enforce a new federal gun law. So what they're basically saying is, hey, ATF, FBI, whoever you are out there, you want to enforce it, go do the work yourself. And, as you know, probably not a lot of the viewers do, but most federal firearm prosecutions aren't the result of brilliant work by a federal law enforcement agency. They've gotten a tip from a local department. Hey, we made an arrest on this guy for, whatever the reason was. And, oh, he had this gun with him, or it looks like he might be a prohibited person. And they turn it over. And so the feds then step in and, hey, thank you for doing all the hard work. We've got it from here and we'll go prosecute. And, so the resources simply aren't there. Now, of course, the IRS has 87,000 new agents who I'm
Right.
sure will be interested in things like this. But the long and short is this federal non-participation law, I think, is a huge indicator of how we feel about gun laws in this state. And
Has it
we've
been
said, look,
litigated?
no, it has not. And there's really been no challenge to it up to this point. So,
I'm
it's,
surprised Bloomberg doesn't show up with some fake
oh,
person who's
yeah.
got standing, some stage thing, right?
Yeah, they sent a lot of people in to lobby against it. We get all kinds of these carpetbagging folks coming in here with
Right. Yeah.
buckets of cash to do everything they need to try to do. But fortunately, we've got a legislature that seems to be interested in doing the right thing. We've got some. I think we have some rhinos in our state legislature, and we've got some people that I've been incredibly disappointed in the way they've done things. But we still have enough of a majority of legitimate conservatives who recognize the importance of individual freedoms, which includes gun laws. And so, we were able to get that bill passed through just this past year here. Not this year, but it was last. No, I'm sorry, it was this year. We passed the Campus Self-Defense Act, which allows students, faculty to be able to now carry on our state campuses of colleges and universities. That won't go into effect until next summer, but that law was passed in spite of a huge push against it. People saying, "Oh, we're gonna have a bloodbath on our campuses." Well, we became constitutional carry in this state in 2016, and the state sheriff's association, state police, every law enforcement lobbying agency entity came out against it, saying it was going to be a bloodbath. We were going to see, officers getting shot. There was going to be violence in our malls, our stores, everywhere. That hasn't happened. That's not who the people of West Virginia are. And
Right.
so, it's just
It's not
I
really
look at
happened
these.
anywhere though. That's
No,
been
no, not
the
because of constitutional carry.
it's Chicken Little, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, it is Chicken Little, and I laugh at them and just saying, "My gosh, do you people actually think about what you're going to say before you say it? You're taking these preposterous positions." And so it's the same thing with campus carry. I do not believe for an instant that we're going to see sudden, Wild West lawlessness on our college campuses next year.
Believe it or
Uh,
not, I had lunch with John Lott, who wrote a book called More Guns, Less Crime,
right.
and the dean of a law school. And we were having a casual conversation, and somebody asked the dean if students would be able to carry on campus. And he said, no, that's not a good idea. And Lott asked, why not? And the dean said, well, we have heated debates in the classroom and everything, and we don't want them having guns in there. And Lott said, I understand it's a
Gosh.
possibility, like getting struck by lightning is a possibility,
Right. Might
but
might
this
get
has been
attacked by a
allowed
shark.
in this has been allowed in this many states for this many years, and we just simply don't have any recorded incidents of what you're talking about. So could you
Right.
point to any possibly? And of course, the dean couldn't. It was just an imaginary problem that doesn't exist. And you talk about things like constitutional carry. Let's go through it logically when it comes to constitutional carry.
Mhm.
Do you think that having a requirement for a license or a permit, whatever your state may call it. I'm so used to saying license to carry firearms here in Pennsylvania,
Right.
but places like New Jersey call it a permit to carry. But if you don't have the requirement of either of those, they talk about, well, then you're going to have people who are prohibited carrying guns without a license. Well, if they're prohibited, they can't legally possess the firearm in the first place.
Mhm.
And so what happens, particularly in a place like Pennsylvania, where there's no training requirement, you go down to the courthouse and you submit your application. They run your PICS check. The sheriff's able to conduct an independent investigation and make a determination on your character and reputation. Though many don't. Many, if you pass your PICS check, then they'll issue the license. Ultimately, all it does is if somebody is too ignorant or lazy to go to the courthouse, even if they're not otherwise prohibited from getting a license to carry, they just didn't spend the 15 minutes and $15. Well, now they're committing a crime that could render them prohibited from possessing firearms throughout the United States for life, because it's a misdemeanor of the first degree, even if you're otherwise eligible. And that carries a max possible sentence of 5 years in state prison, which will prohibit you under 922G. So you're not really, it's nothing more than a trap in many instances, real when you think about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have
And
somebody
we.
asking a question for you specifically. I'm going to put it up on the screen so you can see. Scott
Okay.
says, hey now to Scott. Scott's been to almost 200 U.S. Law Shield seminars in
Oh,
Pennsylvania. I think he holds the world record. They made a
good for him.
national commercial for Law Shield with Scott that I had the pleasure to be a part of. He said, Todd, since West Virginia is so gun friendly, how did they ever choose to elect Joe Manchin, who has collaborated at times to infringe upon all gun owners?
Joe Manchin has been a disappointment in a lot of ways. It's it's interesting. I've met him personally. I will say this for him. He's got a great memory for people. I'm a pilot, just a private pilot. He is as well. And I met him a few times in different airports around the state when he was flying, still able to fly himself. Very personable guy, very popular guy in this state. And, he's from an era when West Virginia was a very solidly blue Democrat state. Um, he's deeply entrenched. He's got relationships. Um, he somehow maintains his popularity. It's a great question, and it's one that I think we see more and more West Virginians now asking, "Why is he still here?" So often you hear, "Joe's got to go," is kind of an ever increasing chant. And again, I'll tell you, you know, at a personal level, what a nice guy. But when it comes to legislation, I agree. There are things that he has done that I believe have sold out the values of this state. And it's a real shame because he's the kind of guy who I think has the influence, the ability to be a unifying force, but the things that he's done just are not consistent with, you know, what so much of West Virginia, really, I think an awful lot of America believe in. How he keeps getting elected. I wish I knew the answer to that question. I wish the state Republican Party knew the answer to that question.
Mm.
They don't seem to be able to beat him, but I think that some of the things that have happened here under the Biden administration, that we've seen him, take a strong stand. Well, I'm not going to back that policy. It's not favorable to the people of my home state. And then in the last second, that final hour, he'll cave. And,
Yeah.
people have a lot of speculation. What did he get? What kind of incentives were given to him? Committee memberships, chairmanships, who knows? But he has done a lot of things here under this current administration that are so incredibly disappointing for a guy who loves the state. And I truly believe he does love the state, but he, I'm afraid, time and time again, has proven to ultimately go along with his party line
Mm.
after putting up what I believe is a good nonpartisan fight against things that he knows are not good for the people of this state, not good for the people of the country. But in the end, for whatever reasons, he caves into it. And again, I think it's a great question. It's one that an awful lot of West Virginians ask every day, especially as election season nears.
And so his days may be numbered from what you're saying.
They could be. I mean, again, we're seeing such a trend in favor of conservative values being reasserted, and people feeling like the Democrat Party isn't advancing those traditional core values, feel like the Republican Party is probably more likely to do so. And so again, we've seen that broad takeover here within the state political system. Literally, we probably have less than 40 elected Democrats in any statewide office in this
Mm.
state. And the House of Representatives here is all Republican. One of our senators is Republican, but Manchin keeps winning somehow. But this year, this coming election could be a different story. And I think people are seeing some of the things that he's done with the infrastructure bill, some of the anti-gun laws and the things that he is supporting that clearly are not consistent with gun laws, gun rights in this state. And I think people are starting to get tired.
I vaguely remember somebody running for office in West Virginia who looked like Paul Bearer from the WWF and called Mitch McConnell Cocaine Mitch. Are you familiar with this?
I remember the cocaine Mitch.
You're right.
Yeah, that's one that sticks with you. I can't think who that would have been.
Cocaine Mitch. We'll have to look that up. Russ, why don't you
Yeah.
try to pull up who came up with Cocaine Mitch? And this guy, I don't know if you've ever seen who I'm talking about from professional wrestling, but this guy looked a lot like Paul Bearer.
Yeah, I've
not too tall.
I've heard the name.
pretty
I've
round.
never been a huge WWF, WWE guy.
Gotcha.
That's funny.
Yeah, we're gonna have to figure that out. Russ, see if you can look up who came up with Cocaine Mitch. I do have another question because you're talking about politics and being a criminal defense attorney. Do you find that, at least the criminal defense attorneys I encounter, it's overwhelmingly left typically? You get many more people on the left in criminal defense than people on the right side of the aisle. Is it the same way in West Virginia?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And
why do you think that is?
My sense is that the idea that you would advocate for somebody who's a criminal is maybe a sense of just helping a guy who was misunderstood or disadvantaged. That seems to be more of a liberal call in my sense, I guess. it's against the rule of law. It's against the police. It's against the government. And certainly that tends to be more of a leftist mindset.
It's weird,
Although
but do
more
you
and
think
more,
against the government is a leftist mindset? Because I feel like there's a lot of people on the right, or basically it's one of the core values is, hey, less government,
yeah, well,
hands off.
I was just going to go there.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I'm sorry.
So, yeah, I think traditionally, historically, there was more support in the government back when the government wasn't so overtly corrupt as it is now. I
Gotcha.
think now, these days, you probably, and that may not have been the best way for me to describe it. Now, these days, I think the left certainly is the party that's all about big government. Let's do more and let's regulate the people. Let's control their thoughts. Let's control their actions. But the Yeah, I think conservatives more and more these days are saying, hey, you know what? I don't want government telling me what to do. I don't need government living my life. But kind of getting back to the point of who who are the people that are typically criminal defense lawyers? My sense, and I may be off on this. I don't know. This is Todd La Neve's opinion, but again, it's about fighting against the man. It's about fighting against maybe trampling on somebody's liberty. So yeah, amateur guess. Honestly, I'm not a political animal for the most part. I know what
Okay.
I believe. So,
No, I gotcha.
but that's kind of my take on it. And I
I
think
gotcha.
conservatives
The guy's name
in
is
this
Don
realm are
Blankenship. Don Blankenship.
yeah. Don did a prison sentence for some coal mine shenanigans that he was convicted of, and yeah, Don was a very wealthy guy. And yeah, now that you say that, I know exactly why you're saying that. Paul Bearer, that clicked in my mind who Paul Bearer was.
Yeah. Right.
So,
I wish I had a
oh,
way
that's funny.
to. I wish I had a way to pull it up.
Throw that up on the screen.
Don
That would be
Blankenship
good.
and
Yeah,
Paul Bear.
side by
People,
side. So,
yeah,
oh,
Russ.
I love it. I love it.
Maybe Russ has got the ability to show Don Blankenship and Paul Bear. We'll let him work
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
So,
Don was
do
a
you?
coal baron here, and made a political run for a couple different offices. Didn't go anywhere because he just didn't have the popularity. But
Mm,
can't say that I disagree with a lot of the things that he said, a lot of the positions that he took. I just don't know that he was ever really a viable candidate.
Cocaine Mitch was pretty clever because we still remember it today, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
He did a
That
good
might
job with that
explain his
one.
little press conference meltdown he had a couple weeks ago. So,
Oh, yeah, that was pretty wild. What is
yeah,
going on, man? So between that and what we're seeing with Biden, right? And
yeah.
we've got is it Feinstein who's
Oh my
having
gosh, 112 years old, and
It-
yeah,
It's crazy.
yeah, yeah. No,
It's
I
crazy.
don't understand how these are the people calling the shots for our country, and I think they're all part of the uniparty that really is controlling Washington, in my opinion. I don't think there's a huge distinction between the two sides when it comes down to the where the rubber meets the road in D.C.
Richard Little has a good question. He said, "Why are guns even political?" I don't think they should be. I think everybody
Yeah, I
should
agree.
want to protect their family and protect their loved ones, regardless.
Absolutely, yeah. The gun itself is
Unfortunately,
not political. The
right.
gun, again, as I said earlier, it's a tool that will do nothing more than you tell it to do. We ought to be allowed to use those tools. That's part of freedom. It's part of the Bill of Rights. We have that absolute God-given right. The government doesn't have any right to control it, and it shouldn't be political. Never should have been in the first place. So,
I had a bunch of guys show up to a seminar one time that had shirts on said "liberal gun owners" or something like that, and they weren't sure how they were going to be treated. Of course, they ended up taking pictures with all of them with their arms around each other and everything at the end. And I think that's
absolutely,
one misconception that people have about the gun owning community. They say, "Oh, well, it's for old white conservative guys." No, you come out to one
no,
of our seminars or go to the range, everybody's cool with everybody. We're all in the
absolutely,
same, everybody's into guns. We're all on the same page. Grand time. Nobody cares about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most accepting communities you could be a part of. You go to the range,
Absolutely.
somebody's always like, making friends right away.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
why don't you come try this one?
Right. Right. Now you're right. If you have a love of guns, man, we're going to get along. Even if we may not see other things in life the same way, we're going to get along over guns.
Yeah.
And I think they can be a tremendous unifying force. Um, but
Do you think
people
that
have to
more
be willing.
people on the left are coming around to gun ownership? Because I've seen it quite a bit during the pandemic and everything. All of a
Yeah.
sudden,
Yeah.
everybody wanted guns, no matter where their political
Yeah.
positions stood
Yep.
prior to that.
It's funny. One of my absolute best friends, an attorney up in the northern panhandle of the state here, probably one of the smartest guys I know, one of the best criminal defense lawyers in the state, hands down, is as far left as I am right.
Hmm.
But we would do anything for one another. No question about it. No questions asked. If I needed him, he would be here, and vice versa. And again, we couldn't see the world more differently, but we're friends first, and we have good discussion. It's not like, oh, you don't believe what I do, I hate you. No, we talk.
Hmm.
We jab each other, we have a good time. But he called me during the pandemic, and he says, "Hey, you're going to be proud of me. I finally bought into the zombie apocalypse narrative." And he had gone out and bought a shotgun and a handgun. And I was like, "Dude, you've got to come down to my farm. I've got my range set up. I'll show you how to use them. We'll have a blast. I'll introduce you to some other things." And he's never been able to take the time to do it because he's far busier than I ever want to be doing this work.
Hmm.
But it's funny. Here's a guy that for the longest time was very, very opposed, very anti-gun, and yeah, he decided to do it. And so I think you're absolutely right. Guns aren't just for conservatives; guns are for everybody, and they are a point over which we can find commonality. And
Sure.
this idea of politicizing them it's tragic in my book because that's not what they were ever intended to be. It's just it's a simple fact of life. It's a right, and you know, we all ought to be able to stand behind our rights.
I think that unfortunately, the reality is when you see anti-gun measures being pushed and laws that would restrict uh, firearms rights, they're typically being pushed by the left. Now, that's not to say that all Republicans are friends of the Second Amendment. There is a
Right.
Republican official in Pennsylvania who is endorsed by some of the most major anti-gun groups, which figure that one out. You want to pull your hair
Yeah.
out of your head.
Yeah.
As somebody who lives and breathes this stuff, I look at that and say, what would be my incentive to vote for that guy? What's the difference, right? If they're both anti-gun,
Right.
I'll vote for nobody.
Yeah.
Somebody reminded me one time, Mike, not everybody lives and breathes by gun rights and that's all they care about. Some people care about other things. Well, fair enough, but you're not going to get my vote. You're
Right.
taking those
Right.
positions. And unfortunately, the Republican officials that you see who take these anti-gun measures, when you hear them actually talk about these issues, they're just as ignorant as anybody on the left.
Oh yeah.
They're
Yeah.
just simply uninformed when it comes to these issues. And then here and there, you'll see somebody on the left support gun measures, but it really is few and far between.
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
spoken to somebody who was a Law Shield member, and he had voted Democrat for many years, became a gun owner, and started voting Republican. And I asked him, unfortunately, there are not many Democrats who are pro-gun, so I understand why he did that. And he said, well, I could tell you exactly how many Democrats they are who are pro-gun. There's 0 Democrats who are pro-gun. And particularly on that side of the state, he's correct. I think we might have some out in Western Pennsylvania and maybe certain other parts of the country. But I don't think you're going to find any pro-gun Democrats in a place like New York or New Jersey, right?
No, definitely not. No, it's odd to me. Even here, you have the current crop of more progressive leftist Democrats who are running for office, and they just don't want guns around. Again, guns are the problem, not the people. Yet let's have a needle exchange program in our downtowns where addicts can come and drop off their dirty needles and get new needles so that we can protect them in that sense. I I'm not going to go down that path. But yeah, Democrats generally, for some reason, have chosen to take up that mantle of anti-gun. And,
But it's similar to what I was talking about in the monologue, where they take the opposite approach on so many other things, right? With the drugs, they're saying, well, we're never going to
yeah,
stop them, so let's at least make it safe.
yeah, yeah,
Yet they don't want firearms instruction for
right,
for
right,
children, right? They don't want young people to learn firearm safety from an early age. I'll just out of sight, out of mind. They'll never encounter a gun in their entire life, and they'll just be better off because of it. And
absolutely.
I had a medical professional tell me a story about how this person came in for an emergency gunshot victim. And when they were cutting the guy's clothes off, they found a gun in his waistband. And you had, 7 or 8 intelligent, educated adults in the room, not one of them who knew how to safely handle a firearm so that they could continue to work on this guy. And
Jeez.
I think that that's a horrible thing. I think that shouldn't
Yeah,
happen anywhere in this country. If you're
absolutely.
somebody who's an American, you should have those basic fundamental rules of safety instilled in you.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah,
reason not to. This is a skill. It's not going to hurt you to have that knowledge, right?
right,
Like learning to
absolutely.
drive a manual transmission. Maybe you're
Yeah,
never going to need to use it, but maybe you will. And if you
yep.
don't ever need to use it, then the knowledge is not going to hurt you, is it?
Now, knowledge, it's funny. It's one of those things that the more you have, the better off you are. Again, whether or not you choose to use it, whether or not you need to use it, isn't the point. The point is you've empowered yourself by gaining knowledge. We still have hunter safety programs offered in a lot of our public schools around the state.
Mm.
Once you reach a certain age here, you can't get a hunting license until you passed a hunter safety program. And the schools, have the DNR come in, and DNR law enforcement officers teach those courses, and it's something that again, it's a big part of the fabric of this state. My own kids all started handling firearms when they were young. My son, who's now 18, at age 5 or 6, was the first time that I taught him about how to use a pistol. And people are like, you got to be crazy, 5 or 6. It was unbelievable how well this kid could shoot at that age.
Mm.
That gave him a caliber that was manageable, and strict safety standards. And it's funny, we've got a video of him at one point. He's shooting a little 380 pistol,
Mm.
and he fires 3 or 4 shots, and then he stops, and nothing happens. And he looks back up towards me, and he's like, "Misfire." And he knew that something was wrong. He knew to keep it pointed down range, and instead of turn around, hey dad, and
Right,
flashing
right.
me with
Yeah.
the he knew exactly what to do. And so we've taught our kids that we don't have a home that's oh, guns are a taboo subject. We've always had firearms, and the way I teach them is just assume that they're loaded, and most of the time they actually are. And it's you know it's just as safe as anything else. It's just as safe as the electrical sockets, because
Right.
they know not to take something and stick it in the socket and get
Hmm.
zapped. Why? Well, we taught them. Amazingly, they had the capacity to learn. They gained knowledge. And the more people we deny that, absolutely, the less safe that our society is going to be. And what's the end result? Well, a bunch of surgeons who are standing around somebody, oh, a gun. What do we do? How
What
do
do
we
we do?
proceed?
Right. Yeah.
Well, how about you just pick it up and stay away from the trigger, and keep your finger out
Keep
of the
pointed
trigger
in a
guard
safe
and
direction,
set it
right?
aside.
Presume it's
Yeah,
loaded. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. It's not
Totally
hard.
crazy. Jose from Philly Firearms Academy always says something funny regarding what you're talking about with children and parenting and teaching them. Because he had a guy who called in and said something along the lines of, I want to own a gun, but I've got kids, so I don't know if I should. And Jose was like, well, it's part of parenting. You've been a good parent so far, right? The kid hasn't eaten lead paint yet, so it's all part of it. It's along those same lines. I do have a question about West Virginia because, Pennsylvania, you have many parts that are quite rural. You have Philadelphia, you've
Sure.
got Pittsburgh, you got a lot of suburban type areas.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's quite comparable to West Virginia. Uh, for some reason, the times that I've been to West Virginia, it reminded me more of my time in Oklahoma, frankly. And I loved my time in Oklahoma. With that being said, when you have places like that and everybody around you is gun friendly, I think sometimes it lulls people into this false sense of security that they will not have problems if they do have to defend themselves, that the police are going to show up and pat them on the back and say, good job, you got the bad guy. That's how we roll in West Virginia. Do you think that there's that misconception among some of the people you meet out there?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's funny. Again, doing the classes with Law Shield, I get to go all over the state, and we have a lot of majority of the state is more rural than than populated, and you see a lot of that. The idea, well, I would never need any kind of self defense coverage. Now, I got 40 acres and a backhoe. Well, that's great. I mean, it's a good plan B. But
did you bring your backhoe to the supermarket when you had to defend yourself?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's really hard. You're right. Dissuading them with this idea that, oh yeah, I went to school with the sheriff. He's a buddy of mine, and he may be, but in that moment, he's not your buddy. In that moment, he's got a job to do, and we have a lot of very good prosecutors that I deal with around the state, smart prosecutors, motivated prosecutors who will go after you no matter what. But I also know a number who, I can have a conversation with, and, they are willing to look at a case from both sides, and they're willing to recognize, hey, this may not be the case that I want to take to trial, that I want to present to a grand jury, but it's going to have to go through the process to get to the point that somebody ultimately says, we're not going to pursue it. And I love to illustrate with folks the Texas shooting, Jack Wilson, the church down in Texas back in I think it was around Christmas of 2019. The guy who walked into the church and pulled out a shotgun after the service started and killed a guy, shot another, and Jack Wilson, who was part of the safety team, shot the guy and put him down. As clear cut a case of self defense as you could imagine. Defense of others. Yet it took 9 months in the state of Texas for Jack Wilson's case to be investigated, turned over to the prosecutor's office in his county. It was investigated there and then ultimately presented to a grand jury. The prosecutor didn't even say, yeah, we're just not going to pursue this one.
Right.
They let a grand jury make the decision. And ultimately, the grand jury said, well, clearly this was not a crime. Yeah. But, it's a simple fact that even if that's ultimately the outcome, you've got to go through the process. And to have this mindset that, they're just going to pat me on the back and tell me, great job. You'll get your, citizens heroism medal here in a couple of weeks. It's not going to happen that way.
Yeah.
It just isn't.
Yeah, because first of all, it is incredibly unlikely that you are going to be under the circumstances as Jack Wilson was, right? That favorable, meaning it was on tape in Texas.
Yeah.
This wasn't California.
Yeah. No, Texas.
It was on tape in Texas. Like this guy came into the church and was murdering parishioners at the church.
Yes.
And you
in
saved
Texas.
the day, right? They I don't know what they charged, what they were considering charging with. If it wasn't saving the day, I think it was inappropriate.
Right.
They charged Jack Wilson with saving the day. So your situation is never going to be quite that favorable.
No.
And if that's what he had to go through with all that, then you're in for a rude awakening.
Yeah. And it's a shame. It's a shame. And it's just one of those things that, I fight against, trying to get people to understand it's not how the world works. There may be pockets where, wink and a nod and, that's the extent of it. It's not the norm by any stretch of the imagination. It is not the norm. So it's, it's one of those things that we fight against. And,
unfortunately, sometimes people will go and they'll look for those stories and say, see, this guy was involved in this situation, and say, okay, I can also sit on my computer and look up the the last 100 people who won the lottery, and
Right.
see,
Yeah,
it happens all
People
the time.
win the lottery.
People
Happens
win the
almost
lottery.
every drawing. Right? Yeah, it does. It does.
It's bound to be
I,
me next.
I know a guy who actually got hit by lightning twice. So
Wow, that's incredible. We ought to have
yeah.
him on the show.
I don't think he can actually get near electronics anymore.
Oh no. We'll interview him in the middle of a field somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh, Todd, I have had a total blast hanging with you. Do you have anything else
Likewise.
you'd like to leave our audience with?
No, Mike, just, obviously, I think it's critical, understand your rights and realize that there are guys like us who do this for a living. And if you need help, if you have questions, reach out to somebody who knows what they're doing. Don't go to the local, title search attorney. He's
Right.
probably not going to know the things that you need to know. Find good qualified counsel. And, we're out here. Nothing that I love more than helping people and making sure that they know what they need to do, can do, shouldn't do, should do ahead of time, so that we don't have to have conversations about, the charges that they're now facing.
I do have a couple of questions that stem from that. Now that you mention it, we're not done quite yet, because I was just talking about this on the last episode. So in West Virginia, if somebody is filling out form 4473, and I don't know if you have a separate state form that they
We
would
do
fill
not.
out. Okay.
No.
So if somebody answers a question incorrectly on the 4473,
Mhm.
perhaps they do have a conviction that would be prohibiting, and they're unaware that it carried that max possible sentence, for example, and they check off no, they're subsequently denied. Are they typically charged with a crime? Do you see that very frequently out there? Because in Pennsylvania, it happens all the time. I get 2 calls a day like that. When I've spoken to some friends in Texas or Colorado, they look at me like I'm nuts. It doesn't happen out there, or at least in their jurisdiction.
Yeah, nothing like what you're saying happens in
Okay.
PA. Nothing like that. It's interesting. I had a guy call me last year, I think, who at one point had been charged with a felony. It was a nonviolent kind of silly circumstance. He ended up getting the case reduced to a misdemeanor.
Mhm.
And he said he had gone to Walmart to buy, I think, a shotgun or a hunting rifle, and he misread the question because he thought, well, I got charged with a felony, so he marked yes that he had been convicted, when in fact he hadn't been convicted of a felony. He was absolutely legal to purchase and possess a firearm. But the store clerk was like, "Oh, hey, man, I'm sorry, but I can't sell you this."
Yeah, they
And
legally
he
can't
said,
if you check yes.
yeah, and so he, I guess they had some discussion. The store manager or the department manager came out and was like, "Well, you said yes," and the guy said, "Well, all I knew is I was charged with that." And ultimately, they said, "Well, we can't sell it to you, and not only can't we sell it to you, but you're now banned from any Walmart nationwide. Your name is in a system."
Wow.
And it's crazy. So we talked about what his options would have been and how we might have been able to file some paperwork and appeal with the ATF and the NICS system and everything through the FBI. He never decided to pursue it, but
Interesting.
I said, going forward, just make sure you understand you weren't convicted of a felony. But he never, as far as I'm aware, heard anything else. And again, I know in some states, if you've marked yes that you are prohibited in some sense, and you still went through with the transaction to try to complete it, that I've heard about people being prosecuted for those things.
Oh, they're not supposed to. They're not supposed to process the background check if you do answer yes. Most of the
Right.
time, when we get in trouble, see people get in trouble, it's because the opposite of what you're saying. Your guy was
Yes,
overly
yes.
cautious, right?
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
people that we deal with, they don't realize that their conviction qualifies, meets the criteria as what's
Right.
being asked of them.
Right.
And this might have something to do with it. In West Virginia, do they have misdemeanors that carry a max possible sentence exceeding 2 years?
Not that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. I don't
Okay.
believe so.
All right.
In fact, most of our misdemeanors, by definition, are up to 1 year.
Okay.
Now, certainly, you could get multiple misdemeanors and get your sentence stacked consecutively.
Yeah, but that doesn't
But
count for this
that's not
purpose.
the
Yeah.
certainly that's not the standard. So,
Yeah. Interesting. So
yeah.
I've spoken to attorneys in other states too, where I explain to them because somebody gets denied in their jurisdiction based on a Pennsylvania misdemeanor of the first degree, which carries a
Mhm.
max possible sentence of 5 years, which is prohibiting under federal law. And they say, how is this guy prohibited? He's only got a misdemeanor. And I explain to them about misdemeanor of the first degree, the max possible sentence. They say, how is that a misdemeanor? Shouldn't that be a
Right.
felony? A max sentence 5 years in state prison.
Yeah.
You do 5 years. And nobody ever does 5 years on these crimes, but that's not what the standard
It's not
talks
the
about. It's
point. Not the
max
point.
possible sentence. So that's
Right.
interesting. So it does that level of confusion would not be something that's prevalent based upon the grading of misdemeanors in West Virginia. It sounds
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
isn't it crazy how the stuff's all over the map in
Oh, it is.
different
It is.
states?
Yeah. You'd like to think there'd be greater consistency, but
Yeah.
heck, we can't get consistency on procedural issues from one county to the next here, it seems
Oh,
sometimes. And
same. Yeah.
so
Right.
it's, you think, man, this ought to be a pretty standard process, but you learn and you move on. And I guess that's a benefit of having experienced counsel at your side. So,
I guess. Do you have local rules out there? Because I've practiced. I've been in 44 different counties as of
okay.
last week. Went to number 44,
Yeah.
and they
Nice.
each have their own local rules, as they call them.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a time when we had local rules, and there are certain things within the different circuits here that, as far as the felony level trial courts, they may have certain standards, but for the most part, procedure is pretty standardized. There are some local rules, but they are by and far not observed most places. So,
I'm not going to hold you to an exact number, but roughly how many counties are there in West Virginia?
55.
Oh, there are 50. So that's
Yes. Yeah.
that's
Yeah. You can
significant.
hold me to it.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
significant.
Yeah, 55, and I've been in every one at some point
Been
in
in
the
all
last 3 decades.
55.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Some of it doing civil work. When I was doing insurance defense, I traveled the
Gotcha.
whole state. But yeah, I've been in every one at some point. And I always like to say that, and $7 would get me a coffee at Starbucks if I would
I
go to
know,
a
right?
Starbucks. But I don't do Starbucks, so
And get some real man coffee.
yeah, whatever. Sheets for me. I don't know. You guys don't have sheets in PA, I
You-
don't think, but
What are you
it's like your
talking about? We
Wawa.
don't. We of course we have sheets in PA.
Do you have sheets? Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. They just
Well,
got
actually,
more.
no. You know what? I guess I know that up around Pittsburgh. I know I've seen them, but having grown
We
up in
got
the
us.
Westchester area, Wawa was the big thing back then.
All right. So if you're ever in Chester County area, there is a Sheetz that is right off the Turnpike exit, Morgantown,
okay.
right over there.
Well, I'm going to
You
be up there
gotta-
tomorrow.
Well, then you can visit Sheetz while you're out here.
There you go. A little taste of home.
In an elite gas station. I hope we don't have like a bunch of Wawa fans in the comments like, boo.
Hey, Sheets is one of my favorite restaurants. So.
That's great. Well, Todd, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you being so generous with your time this evening.
Thanks for having me, Mike. This was a blast. Enjoyed it, and look forward to catching up with you.
Hey, plug your Twitter, your website, everything like that. Don't forget.
Yeah. So I actually have a new site that should be coming out any day, probably within the next couple of weeks. WestVirginiaGunLaw.com. Currently, my main business site is 8777-WVLaws.com. But the WestVirginiaGunLaw.com site is a new project. I'm really excited to get that up and running. I am on Twitter at WV Gun Law, because West Virginia Gun Law was too long for the Twitter handle, but at WV Gun Law for Twitter, and just getting that account up and running. And that's I guess that's everything. I'm on Facebook, just my name, Todd La Neve. So
there you go. That look good. We got it right up there. We got
at WV Gun Law. Yep, that's Twitter. And then 8777WVLaws.com is my primary website. And then WestVirginiaGunLaw.com is coming soon.
Coming soon, ladies and gentlemen. So keep an eye out. That's all time we got for today. Stick around for We the People, the Constitution Matters. Pastor David Whitney, Professor Phil Duffy. We miss you, Ellie. Daddy loves you.